McGraw-Hill, Living with Art, 13th edition, Part 4, Chapter 12, Arts of Ritual and Daily Life. Chapter outline: clay, glass, metal, wood, fiber, ivory, jade, and lacquer, art, craft, and design. Clay is one of the oldest durable art materials. Artists make clay objects using the slab and coil techniques, throwing on a wheel and adding slips and glazes for color. This vessel was made by a technique called coiling. The ceramicist rolls out rope-like strands of clay, then coils them upon one another and joins them together. A vessel made from coils attached one on top of the other will have a rigid surface, but the coils can be smoothed completely to produce a uniform flat wall. The native peoples of the southwestern United States made extraordinarily large, finely shaped pots by coiling. During the 20th century, the tradition was received by a few supremely talented individuals, including the Pueblo potter Maria Martinez. The Chinese bowl illustrated here would have been thrown on a wheel by a specialist at one of the ceramic centers of Imperial China, where thousands of workers produced ceramics on an industrial scale using assembly line methods. The bowl is made of porcelain, a ceramic made of mixing kaolin, a fine white clay, with finely ground puntance, also known as porcelain stone. When fired at a high temperature, elements in the mixture fuse into a glassy substance, resulting in a hard, white, translucent ceramic. The secret of porcelain was discovered and perfected in China, and for hundreds of years, potters elsewhere tried without success to duplicate it. Glass objects are made with melted sand blown through a long tube. If clay is one of the most versatile materials, glass is perhaps the most fascinating. When held up to the light, the appearance of glass changes from different angles. Although there are numerous formulas for glass, its principal ingredient is usually silica or sand. The addition of other materials can affect color, melting point, strength, and so on. When heated, glass becomes molten, and in that state, it can be shaped by several different methods. Unlike clay, glass never changes chemically as it moves from a soft, workable state to a hard, rigid one. As glass cools, it hardens, but it can then be reheated and rendered molten again for further working. According to a legend recorded by the ancient Roman author Pliny, the secret of making glass was discovered accidentally by seafaring Phoenician traders. Debarking from their ships on the eastern Mediterranean shore, the traders made a fire on the beach and then set to cooking their cauldrons over it on lumps of nitrium from their cargo. Nitrium was a valued substance that seems to have been either potato ash or soda. The heated melted nitrium, which fused with the sand, created a transparent liquid that cooled as glass. Delightful as the story is, archaeological evidence suggests that glass was first manufactured further inland, in the region today divided between eastern Syria and northern Iraq. From there, the technology spread throughout the ancient Near East, including Egypt, where this bottle was made. A special branch of glassworks, stained glass, is a technique used for windows, lampshades, and similar structures that permit light to pass through. Stained glass is made by cutting sheets of glass in various colors into small pieces, then fitting the pieces together to form a pattern. Often the segments are joined by strips of lead, hence the term leaded stained glass. The 12th and 13th centuries in Europe were a golden age for stained glass. In the religious philosophy that guided the building of the great cathedrals of that time, glass was viewed as a spiritually transforming substance. The soaring interiors of the new cathedrals were illuminated by hundreds of jewel-like windows, such as the one illustrated here from the Cathedral of Notre Dame at Chartres, France. Each scene represents a moment in life of Saint Nicholas. His youth is pictured in the center, including attending school, donating money to the poor, and being thanked for his generosity. Surrounding the narrative images, the space is filled with an abstract pattern of colored squares bordered with floral motifs. Every inch of the window is a riot of colorful light. Stained glass uses disc of colored glass between lead strips. Metal works are made by casting and forging. Works made of precious metals have illustrated wealth and been used as offerings for the dead. This bracelet from Italy testifies to the skills of ancient Roman goldsmiths. It's made from two thin strips of forged gold joined with a hinge. The top and bottom edges are turned inward at a 45-degree angle. This keeps the bracelet from resting flat against the skin and allows light to illuminate the design in its center. Created by piercing the gold with a small tool, opening tiny holes, the open work decoration consists of meandering vines and abstracted flowers. The large emeralds and blue glass beads in the center rest in raised settings that allow light to pass through. Pearls once occupied the empty settings, two of which have thin gold straps to hold the irregularly shaped pearl in place. Emeralds, sapphires, and pearls also appearing along the top and bottom borders. Roman women wore bracelets like this to display their wealth, along with brooches, earrings, necklaces, and rings. Men wore only rings, though sometimes on every finger. Wood has been used for art and functional objects by most cultures. Because wood is perishable, many works have disappeared. Wood. Widely available, renewable, and relatively easy to work. Wood has been used by almost all cultures across history to fashion objects for ritual or daily use. As an organic material, however, wood is vulnerable. Heat and cold can warp it. Water can cause it to rot. Fire will turn it to ash, and insects will eat it away. We must assume that only a small fraction of the wooden objects made over the centuries have survived. The most common product of the woodworker's art is furniture. The basic forms of furniture are surprisingly ancient. The chair, for example, seems to have been developed in Egypt around 2600 BCE. Massive thrones for rulers and humble stools for ordinary people had existed earlier, but the idea of a portable seat with a back and armrest was an innovation. Miraculously preserved by the dry desert climate of Egypt, this 3,500-year-old chair shows that artistic attention was lavished on furniture from the very beginning. The Egyptian furniture maker used mortise and tendon joints to hold the chair together. Instead of nails, a projecting piece of wood from one part of the chair fits into a void in the other, holding the two parts together. Created for the mother of a court official, the chair's legs are carved as the legs and paws of a lion, an emblem of royal power. The god Bes, in the form of a lion, also stands on its hind legs on the back of the chair, flanked by protective amulets and columns symbolizing stability. The lion god amulet and columns allowed scholars of Egyptian art to decipher the chair's symbolic meaning. With the Elume bowl by the great Yoruba sculptor Olawi of Isles, in contrast, much of the meaning is lost, for some of the iconographic elements are unique, and the original context in which the bowl was used is no longer known. Olume is a Yoruba word meaning one who knows honor. It refers to the kneeling woman, the Olawi depicted holding the lidded bowl. She is a messenger of the spirits, and she kneels in respect and devotion. Olume bowls were common in Yoruba culture. Often they were used to store kola nuts, which were offered to guests as a sign of hospitality and to deities during worship. Of the many Elume bowls to have come down to us, however, Only this one includes a kneeling nude male among the small figures supporting the bowl, and only this one features 4 women dancing in a circle on the lid. Both subjects are unprecedented in Yoruba art. Fiber arts, including garments and vessels, can be made by weaving and basketry. Fiber arts have traditionally been made with locally available materials. A fiber is a pliable, thread-like strand. Almost all naturally occurring fibers are either animal or vegetable in origin. Animal fibers include silk, wool, and the hair of such animals as alopecias and goats. Vegetable fibers include cotton, flax, raffia, sisal, rushes, and various grasses. Fibers lend themselves to a variety of techniques and uses. Some can be spun into yarn and woven into textiles. Others can be pressed into felt or twisted into rope or string. Still others can be plaited to create baskets and basket-like structures, such as hats. The art of basketry is highly valued among many native peoples, including the Pomo, whose ancestral lands are in the present-day California. Legend tells that when a Pomo ancestor stole the sun from the gods to light the dark earth, he hung aloft in a basket that he moved across the sky. The daily journey of the sun reenacts that original event. Pomo baskets are thus linked to larger ideas about the universe and about the transfer of knowledge from gods to humans at the beginning of the world. Textile is the fiber art we are most intimately familiar with, for we clothe ourselves in it. The very first textiles were probably produced by felting, a technique in which fibers are matted and pressed together. Another ancient technique still in use today is weaving, which places 2 sets of parallel fibers at right angles to each other and intersects one set through the other. Generally on a loom or a frame, one set of fiber is held out taut. This is called the warp. The other set, known as the weft or woof, is interwoven through the warp to make the textile. Nearly all textiles, including those used for our clothing, are made by some variation of this process. The ancient Inca, whose civilization flourished in the mountains of Peru during the 15th century, draped the gold and silver statues of their deities with fine cloth offerings. Textiles were also accepted as payment for taxes, for they were considered a form of wealth. Standardized patterns and colors on Inca tunics instantly signals the wearer's ethnicity and social status. Woven around 1500 of camelid fibers and cotton, the man's tunic illustrated here is a single piece of cloth that was folded and sewn up at the sides. It is a repeated pattern of an 8-pointed star motif surrounded by the checkerboard borders, which are organized with mosaic balance above the broad red band. While they wore tunics for warmth, Inca dignitaries also exchanged the garments to reinforce social and political bonds. Among the most famous Islamic textiles are the immense rugs known as the Eridibal carpets. Like most Islamic carpets, the Eridibal carpets were created by knotting individual tufts of wool onto a woven ground. The labor was time-consuming. The Eridibal carpet shown here has over 300 knots per square inch, or over 35 million knots in all. Ivory, jade, and lacquer. Ivory is a luxury material, carved from elephant tusk, and was a precious trade resource. Technically, ivory may refer to the teeth and tusks of a number of large mammals. In practice, it is elephant tusks that have been the most widely sought after and treasured. Today, considered an endangered species, Asian elephants once ranged from the coast of Iran through the Indian subcontinent to southern China and Southeast Asia. African elephants once roamed much of the continent south of the Sahara Desert. Trade in elephant tusk rose in ancient times and continued unchecked well into the 20th century, bringing raw ivory to cultures that did not have access to it. Ivory from African elephants was particularly admired for its ease of carving and its durability. The ivory vessel illustrated here was carved during the late 15th or early 16th century by a sculptor of the Sabhi culture, which flourished then among the West African coast in the region of present-day Sierra Leone. The vessel was created for a Portuguese patron. A lidded bowl atop an elaborate pedestal, it resembles a European chalice, although it was made to store salt. Attendants ring the base, altering with vigilant dogs that bare their teeth at snakes descending from above. Stylized roses adorn the lid, and the acorn rests above the very top. Many African cultures associate elephants symbolically with rulers, for they were seen to be mighty, powerful, wise, and long-lived. For Europeans, ivory represented luxury and global exploration. Early Portuguese explorers had been deeply impressed by the skill of the ivory carvers they encountered in Africa, and for a century or so they commissioned works such as this salt cellar for European collectors. A stunning example of African artistry, the vessel is intriguing for the way it mingles African and European forms and imagery. The Portuguese client probably supplied the African artists with the visual material such as the woodcut illustration of roses, a flower not found in West Africa. The Sepi artists combined the European elements with the local belief in snakes as spirits and in the dogs as guardians with special powers to see ghosts. Ivory, jade, and lacquer. Jade is extremely hard, allowing small details and having symbolic value for various cultures. Jade is a common name for two minerals, nephrodite and jadeite. Ranging in color from white through shades of brown and green, the two stones are found principally in the East and Central Asia, as well as in Central America. Although their underlying structures differ, they share the same extreme hardness, the ice-cold touch, and the translucence that are treasured by cultures with access to it. The ancient Olmec, whose colossal stone head we looked at in Chapter 11, prized green jade. They associated its color with plant life, especially with corn, their most important crop, and its translucence with rainwater, on which the agriculture bounty depended. In China, jade has been prized and carved for some 6,000 years. In early Chinese belief, the stone was credited with magical properties. The jade basin seen here was carved in high relief by rubbing abrasive sand against the stone with the help of a bow. Using this slow method, the artist created stylized dragons with long snouts and sharp talons. The dragons twist and turn through a cloudy sky, chasing flaming pearls. A landscape of tall mountains appears at the bottom of the vessel. In China, pearls are symbols of power, spiritual energy, and of the moon. Dragons, who represent good fortune and cosmic energy and covet pearls in Chinese lore, are also closely associated with the emperor. A poem carved inside this basin was written by the Qianlong emperor. Ivory, jade, and lacquer. Lacquer is made from sap and wood or textiles built up in layers. Lacquer is made from the sap of a tree that originally grew only in China. Harvested, purified, colored with dyes, and brushed in thin coats over wood, the sap hardens into a smooth glass-like coating. The technique demands great patience, for up to 30 coats of lacquer are needed to build up a substantial layer, and each must dry thoroughly before the next can be applied. Artists in ancient China used lacquer to create trays, bowls, storage jars, and other wares that were lightweight and delicate-looking, yet water-resistant and airtight. Exported with other luxury goods over the long overland trade route known as the Silk Road, Chinese lacquerware was admired as far away as the Roman Empire. Knowledge of lacquer spread early from China to Korea and Japan, as did the cultivation of the sap-producing tree. Asian artists developed a variety of techniques for decorating lacquerware. In China, a favorite method was to apply layer after layer of red lacquer, building up a surface thick enough to carve in relief. The scene on the snuff bottle illustrated here depicts two men walking in a landscape. The carving is in high relief. The rocks and the trees to each side represent the last of the applied layers, and the diamond-shaped pattern between the two figures is cut into the earliest layer. Tobacco was introduced to China by European merchants who brought it from the Americas. While Europeans carried their powdered tobacco in boxes, the Chinese found medicinal bottles were more suitable and began producing small snuff bottles in the 18th century. Early examples were made for the imperial court, but a taste for these practical yet beautiful objects soon spread outside the palace. The elaborate carving of this lacquer snuff bottle suggests that it was made for a very wealthy client. Art, craft, and design. Fine art was distinguished from crafts in the past, but that distinction is now questioned. Dale Chihuly is an example of a glass artist. We illustrate a detailed view of his matcha forest here. Seeing stained glass windows like those at the Sainte Chapelette in Chartreuse inspired Chihuly to work with brightly colored glass. The artist uses a full palette of 300 colors to create the organic bell-like forms he calls macchia, Italian for spots. He uses one color for the inside of the form and another for the outside, and a complementary color for the lip. Chihuly adds a layer of colored glass chips between the interior and exterior layers to create the spotted effect. Like other forms by the artist, the macchia are created by heating colored glass rods until they melt, then blowing through a long stainless steel pipe to create the final shape. Chihuly displays his macchia either alone or in groups, allowing light to pass through the glass walls for luminescent effect. Perhaps it should not surprise us that potters were among the first to practice their craft as art. Clay, after all, had long had a double life, used at once for sculpture and for functional vessels. Danish artist Merit Rasmussen uses the traditional coiling technique to build non-representational forms in fired clay, known as stoneware. Red twisted form illustrates her special fascination with continuous surfaces. A single flowing ribbon with no beginning and no end. Red twisted form curls around itself, opening up negative spaces, delighting in the play between convex and concave surfaces, and inviting us to take a visual ride on its roller coaster. I work with the idea of a composition in 3 dimensions, seeking balance and harmony, Rasmussen writes. The finished form should have energy, enthusiasm, and a sense of purpose. Lacquer is less common than ceramics, but still a vital medium that responds to both craft and fine art. Japanese artist Tanka Nobuki sculpts lacquer into elegant abstract forms on a large scale. The tactile memory, floral impression, appears at first to be a vase or similar vessel, but it is open at both ends. The artist translated the feeling of touching lacquer into a long flowing shape that swells in the middle and tapers and curls inward at the ends. To make the work, Nobuki first created a temporary styrofoam mold of the shape. He then built up layers of hemp cloth soaked in red lacquer, removing the mold when the form was complete. Rather than carve a design through the lacquer, Nobuki presents the users with the smoothness and sheen of his material. Fiber art faced resistance to its inclusion among the fine arts. The path was more clear in Europe, where the tradition of collaboration between artists and tapestry workshops had been kept alive. During the 1960s, exhibition of contemporary tapestries included increasing numbers of ambitious, large-scale works in fiber art done by independent artists. Much of the new work abandoned tapestry's centuries-old link with painting. Made from rough, natural fibers and using such techniques as knotting, braiding, and crochet, it moved beyond the flat surface. We have already seen American artist Beryl Korat explore these ideas in her installation Text and Commentary, which combined video and weaving. Sheila Hicks' fiber art demands to be seen as sculpture. Her Escalade Beyond Chromatic Lands is a massive three-dimensional work that explodes with rich, saturated color. The stacked fiber spheres climb high above the viewer, and their materials even flow onto the cracks of the surrounding wall. The installation engages with its space and envelops viewers in color, texture, and form. The spheres are not perfectly round, and the surfaces are not even, but rather irregular with bits of fabric poking out. Even sound plays a role in the work, as Hicks' installation absorbs sound waves and muffles noise within the exhibition space. Her sculptural forms create a whimsical environment for viewers to lose themselves in. In works such as Sasa, the contemporary Ghanaian artist Anatutsu takes his formal inspiration from textiles, although the material he works with is not fiber but found metal objects, copper wire and aluminum. In its visual splendor, Sasa draws on the tradition of African royal textiles such as kente. Kente, too, was an art of recycling, for it was originally made of silk fabric imported from China. African weavers separated the silk fabric into threads, which they then rewove into patterns that expressed their own culture. For Anatutsu, the transformation of found materials into symbols of global industry and trade, appropriated and reinvented by the local hands, is a metaphor for Africa in the 21st century. Art, craft, and design. The arts and crafts movement promoted the value of handmade objects and traditional skills. During the Industrial Revolution, the handmade world, which had existed since the beginning of human culture, was giving way to a world in which many objects used in daily life were mass-produced by machines. Small workshops were being replaced by large factories, and the nature of work itself was being transformed. Many social thinkers of the 19th century criticized those developments, and their criticism of industrialization went hand in hand with their criticism of the new distinction between fine art and craft. They pointed to a loss of dignity and pride in one's work that resulted from factory labor. They objected to the glorification of fine arts over crafts, and to the low esteem in which people who worked with their hands were now held. They mourned the losses and the satisfaction to be had in making things by hand, and the pleasure experienced in using them, and they worried about the effect it would have on the human spirit. Criticism was especially strong in England, where the Industrial Revolution had begun. Many people grew determined to carve out a place for handmade objects in the new industrial order. They set up workshops and studios. They taught themselves and one another such skills as pottery, bookbinding, furniture making, and weaving. They held exhibits and formed societies, most famously in 1887, the Arts and Crafts Exhibition Society. The arts and crafts movement, as it has come to be known, spread quickly throughout Europe and to the United States, where its most vocal proponent was Gustav Stickley. In 1901, Stickley began to publish an influential magazine called The Craftsman, which introduced the ideals of the arts and crafts movements to a broader public. Several years later, he founded the Craftsman Workshop, where the hexagonal library table illustrated here was built. Made of American oak, its simple lines, forthright construction, and unadorned surfaces epitomize the style that Stickley favored for what he called a democratic art. Art, craft, and design. The Bauhaus bridged the gulf between creativity and manufacturing, emphasizing functionality and uncomplicated modern design. The arts and crafts movement heightened public awareness of the value of handmade objects and traditional skills in the face of industrialization. Most of the movement's leading voices fully recognized the value of mass production in making goods available to a great number of people at affordable prices, and they appreciated the ability of machines to facilitate dull, repetitive tasks. However, the ideals of the movement encouraged cooperation between artists and manufacturers. In this new relationship, an artist's task was no longer to make an object, but to design an object that could be made by industrial methods. Writing in The Craftsman, Gustav Stickley referred to such objects as industrial art. Within a few years, the field had become known as design. Art, design, and industry came together at the Bauhaus, a German school founded in 1919. The Bauhaus strived to bridge the gulf between creativity and manufacturing that opened during the Industrial Revolution. Each student learned both the aesthetic side of the creative process and the technical side of manufacturing, both traditional and modern. Bauhaus students and faculty emphasized functionality and uncomplicated modern design. Maureen Bennett made the tea infuser to meet the modern needs and taste. She translated the familiar teapot form into elemental geometric shapes of sphere, cone, circle, and rectangle made of silver. Ebony wood included to add contrasting color and to keep the handle from getting too hot, provided textural variety. Although Brandt made the work by hand out of hammered metal, the design lent itself to mass production. Art, craft, and design. Digital technologies such as 3D printing are applied to crafts today. Dirk van der Kooj works in the digital realm at his design studio. He enlisted computer-aided design and 3D printing technology to create this work entitled Chubby Chair. Made from plastic of old refrigerators, Chubby Chair is printed in thick layers by a repurposed robotic arm. Unlike most 3D printers that extrude material horizontally to build up their forms, Van der Kooj's robot arm follows the contours of the object it makes. The machine's back and forth motion can be seen in the lines that run up the legs and across the seat and back. Within these thick lines, smaller semicircular ridges trace the arm's slow movement as it pushes out the material. A closer examination reveals changes in color and texture of the plastic material, which was melted down for the chair. Like Matthew Anglo Harrison's MK003 Splinter, Van der Kooj's chair reveals its manufacturing process rather than hiding it with a slick, smooth finish. Although made with machines rather than the human hand, the chair nevertheless emphasizes its craft. Art, craft, and design. Artists today question the gap between art and technology. Fashion designer Iris van Herpen makes wearable garments that combine fashion, nature, and technology. Her designs translate technological and scientific advances into functional, approachable, visually rewarding objects for our lives. Inspired by such diverse phenomena as the movement of water or the charge of electricity, Van Herpen explores materials beyond traditional fabric, sometimes printing entire garments on a 3D printer. Dress combines plastic, PVC, silk, and metal to create the design. Van Herpen imagined that one day garments would be able to transform themselves into other shapes to respond to the environment. The result is a dress that looks alive, yet also mechanical. Van Herpen designs using computers, but her work relies as much on the skill and attention of a human maker as it does on machines. As she explains, I could not express myself without the help of technology or without the help of handwork. If one of the two would not be in there, it would not make sense. This concludes Chapter 12.